When André Rieu, the king of the waltz, passed away in the middle of a concert at the age of 75, the world of music reached its lowest point, and everything changed. But at the pinnacle of his genius, what caused that collapse? We need to know the specifics of his life in order to comprehend. André Rieu was born on October 1, 1949, into a family during a period when punishment was valued more highly than a child's mental health. His father dominated the house as ruthlessly as he ruled the stage, and he was the third of 6 children. Orchestras admired his father, André, who was also a well-known conductor. However, youngsters at his own home dreaded him. Their house was devoid of laughing and lullabies. Love was frigid and abstract. Later on, André would say, "My parents didn't love me," as a quiet admission of reality rather than as a wound uncovered. His mother had an obsession with abilities and academics. Imagination was a liability, in her opinion. It was yelled back at him through the house like an indictment when a teacher complimented his artistic abilities. The urge to be creative was a weakness, not a strength. However, everything changed when he became 5 years old. A slim, elegant 18-year-old raised him. She was his first instructor on the violin. She did not chastise him. He was urged to feel by her. Young André discovered something he had never seen in the sweep of her bow. Freedom, a tremor that sounded like life, but without passion or love, and he was certainly amazed. Then he developed an interest in music, very enticing sensation. It wasn't a win. Something that would emerge from deep within him was just getting started. Some kids worked on scales. He sought resonance, but happiness had a price. His father's austerity and his developing love of waltzes clashed during his adolescent years. His beau's lyricism was mocked at home. His father yelled at him, "I didn't raise you to play waltzes." Those were not merely reprimands. Their goal was to destroy his soul. When Marjorie showed up about 1968, that was the last nail in his coffin. Not a conductor's score, but André's chosen companion. His mother greeted her angrily. "Leave," she commanded. Rejection stacked on top of rejection. André left that very evening. He didn't go back. As he became famous, their house stayed the same, a vacant shell. His parents never once went to his shows. The quiet at home was a memory he couldn't get rid of, even when the arena was filled with devoted supporters. "I spent years in therapy trying to understand why my childhood felt so hollow," he once admitted. That gap was never filled by the applause, but he felt seen at last through music. The violin was more than just a musical instrument. It served as a lifeline. Windows opened whenever he performed. André broke and began the rebellion in 1978, following years of formal orchestral testing and enduring the sterile echo of concert halls. The Maestri Salon Orchestra was founded by him, 12 hopeful dreamers without costumes. These youthful aspirations were performed in forgotten border towns, backyard weddings, and small community halls. They were merely doing music for its own sake. Just sound, shared and human. No critics, no elaborate sets. There was someone else at the center of everything, but it was all on the outside. Marjorie was there. She managed business meetings, bookings, and ghostwriter arrangements, and was steady, accurate, and invisible. The unseen power underlying his apparent sorcery was her. She joked, "Sell more records," not out of curiosity or interest, but to create the future. When he paused at the thought of purchasing a dilapidated castle, this silent revolution was not broadcast on television. Someone released it. He officially established the Johann Strauss Orchestra in 1987. 12 musicians on a bold quest to revive the pulse of music. The solemn formality was abandoned. Inviting joy, they donned color instead of black tailcoats. They had an electrifying 1988 New Year's Day launch, complete with dancing lights and melodies of laughter. Audiences roared, but critics scoffed at them. It wasn't a concert they were at. They were taking back music. By 1995, a spontaneous change occurred on one of the biggest platforms in Europe, the UEFA Champions League final in Vienna. As Shikovich's Waltz New ascended, Rieu stepped onto the field with his orchestra. Football supporters clapped, paused, and swayed. The stadium was a graceful glow. Strain melted the sport's intensity. It felt like a cosmic moment when Ajax scored. It turned into a legend. Strauss and Company quickly rose to the top of the Netherlands charts for 19 weeks. It was unprecedented in the world of classical music. Millions of copies were sold worldwide. Australia immediately followed. More than 38,000 spectators crammed into stadium seats in Melbourne to watch a live fairy tale. They also have 8 of the top 10 DVDs in the nation. Every one of them is his. He was standing next to music stars like AC/DC and Pink. Even after all of his achievements, some people continued to disapprove of what he was doing. The traditionalist was the one who retreated. For Rieu's audiences, however, it meant everything. One conductor spat, musical pornography, mocking lights and gowns, sneering that joy had no place in art. The grandparents' emotional tears had found a stage in the dancing family. "You don't feel the solemn hush that drives people away," he remarked. He meant it. Concerts were not what he was selling. He was giving the populace hope. However, the maestro was inconsolable behind the glittering lights and packed stadiums. At the height of his success in 2010, a new issue emerged. André developed an inner ear infection due to a viral illness. Balance is crucial for a violinist. His entire world swung. There were no more tours. Shows were canceled. It was more than just illness. The man whose main selling point was proclaiming can do was forced to say, "I can't." He was unaware that he had a fracture. More specifically, it was more than illness. It was the instant a myth broke, exposing itself in a distorted mirror and a shuddering unbalance. André Rieu was killed in 2010 at the age of 62 by a vestibular nerve virus. He was thrown into unrelenting pandemonium by an attack on his inner ear. Nothing provided support, not even the floor underneath him, as the room swung around. He lay in bed, staring at walls that whirled with ruthless velocity through blurry eyes. The man who had never faltered suddenly felt disoriented. Doctors prescribed rest. Once as stiff as a cement wall, the man and the tour schedule fell apart like cheap sheet music. Andreas took a very long time to recuperate. Every kind of traditional therapy was unsuccessful. Then an Australian fan wrote a letter. He gave vestibular exercises that helped him regain his balance and talked about his personal struggle with the same virus. Desperate, André took the advice. The distortion gradually stopped. He stood up again after withdrawing for months, unsteadily at first, then firmly. He eventually made a comeback to the stage, leading a tour that signified both his musical and reputational recovery. Everyone believed he had returned to his ideal self, but no wound, emotional or physical, heals completely. The dizziness subsided, but his balance was still precarious. Although management was quick to reject the resurgence of imbalance concerns in 2012, they acknowledged that the ear that had been attacked was still vulnerable. They also warned that he would be in serious risk, particularly if he was performing, if there was a potential that his illness may return. Then came a December tour in Leeds in 2016. Once more, the horn of dread rang forth. André held a special place in his heart for a companion. He was a long-standing buddy and trombonist named Rieu, and he always went with the group. The fact that he had passed away while sleeping was shocking, but everyone else was going about their own business. André's world was rocked by a massive earthquake. He abruptly canceled the Nottingham performance in the middle of the tour and stopped the remaining shows in Glasgow, Birmingham, and London. It wasn't sickness. It was sorrow, heartbreaking and irrevocable. Later on, he acknowledged that he was like a brother, a family in every manner. The orchestra wavered in grief. The music performances carried the burden of what had disappeared from André's life when they resumed. Despite everything, he remained resilient, and he entered the stage in 2019 when he was overcome with sweats and a shivering fever due to a nasty sickness. Those who knew him observed how he was struggling with that on stage, even if the smile persisted. The moment that would shatter him completely then arrived. He was to play at 6 sold-out concerts in Mexico City in March 2024. The victory was encouraging. Acuity became crisis after only the second performance. Like storm clouds, sickness, travel lag, and altitude came together. There were rumors that he stumbled backstage, breathless bewilderment, fever. Touching his phone, he whispered a call to Marjorie. "This is not how I want my first concert day to go." That was how 4 concerts ended. More than 40,000 ticket buyers were incensed. All 125 members of the orchestra were sent home in the middle of the tour. Tickets were refunded, and flights were reversed. There is no way to maintain their peaceful dignity in the midst of emergency mayhem. Something new occurred during that pause. His son Pierre came forward. He was no longer only a tour manager or a son. He turned into a shield. Intercontinental marathons are over. The speed decreased. A soft fortress centered on André's health, Europe-only performances, regulated schedules, rest and recuperation. It was not a retreat. It was the right decision. However, they would have avoided the repercussions of what was going to happen next if it had been taken a little sooner. Meanwhile, everything depended on Pierre, who had been in charge of logistics until taking on the role of curator of tempo. Where André would have rushed ahead, he applied the brakes. Every venue and every flight now went through a screening. Is he capable of doing this without breaking? By taking on the role of weight-bearer, he made it possible for André to recover his music without sacrificing himself. Everything was rewritten by that fall and that choice. This was not a maestro's downfall. A new one was born. Someone who knew you had to earn every note worth playing. Care, not perseverance. And, as a result, he became more memorable and human. The change became apparent by the summer of 2024. However, not every wound had healed. Slowing down had a hidden cost for 75-year-old André Rieu, who had made his livelihood on the road. The steady motion had been his lifeblood for decades. Every performance now carried a different type of pressure as Pierre tightened his grip. He was under pressure to show that he was still capable, not only for the public, but also for himself. That July, he made a comeback to his hometown stage, MRI. Everybody in the crowd knew the man's background, making it the safest arena on his schedule. As they had for years, the show sold out right away. However, the preparation was no longer standard behind the scenes. Rehearsal blocks include information about medical clearances, oxygen availability backstage, and rest periods. His team now collaborates with doctors and physical therapists, having previously concentrated on lighting cues and sound balance. The checklist that was attached to his dressing room wall was never seen to the audience. It was a subdued admission that his body was no longer his silent companion. It was a short list, but it was accurate. Hydrate before the performance, keep the encore brief, and avoid handshakes after the show until your heart rate has steadied. Pierre applied these regulations with the same gravity his father had previously shown for tempo indications. However, there were times when the old pace attempted to resurface despite the precautions. Lost in the surge of strings, he played a waltz longer than intended on the third night in Maric. For a few minutes, it seemed like the past, as the orchestra followed and the audience stood. However, his shirt stuck to him as he left the stage, giving him the same moist, heavy feeling he had experienced in Mexico City. Pierre's face conveyed what neither of them wanted to say out loud. They had almost gone over the remaining line. The modifications were artistic as well as physical. André started moving some of the pieces about, reducing the volume in ways that only a skilled ear could detect. There were less high-energy polkas. The set lists started to be dominated by ballads, slower waltzes, and symphonic narrative. Unaware that the modification was actually a tactic, fans welcomed it. It was a method of creating the appearance of limitless endurance while using less energy to do it. He spent more time at home in between gigs than he had in decades. Rick used the garden behind his 15th-century house and the stone streets as a rehearsal space. He kept his energy bank full for performance days by practicing in privacy, rather than spending hours with the entire orchestra. His greater readiness to say no, fewer late-night calls, and a gentler rhythm to his voice were all noted by friends. The applause was different when André Rieu returned to the stage following a protracted health fight. It was more than a holiday. Relief was felt. The King of the Waltz' next performance was uncertain for months. He was stopped in the middle of his tour by a viral ailment in 2009. André never considered giving up on music, even though doctors had cautioned him that pushing too soon could end his career. Antwerp hosted the first concert back. Prior to his illness, all of the tickets were sold out. A smaller performance was anticipated by many. Rather, Rieu performed for 3 hours straight without skipping a single song. He welcomed his listeners with that comforting familiarity. But the astute observer saw the shifts. Between pieces, he sat. For the first time in decades, his son Pierre was spotted on the sidelines for the entire performance as he paced himself. As you are aware, Pierre Rieu had been stealthily managing a large portion of the company while his father was ill. In addition to managing schedules and overseeing the production, he had the last say over whether the tour would even continue. He was now clearly a part of the show's safety net. André acknowledged in subsequent interviews that Pierre was strictly instructed to intervene if he had symptoms of lightheadedness. It was a big responsibility. There was more to this than just music. This had to do with the health of his father. Fans continue to discuss a memorable moment that happened halfway through the 2010 tour. During the encore in Emmerich, André stopped and beckoned Pierre to the front of the stage. Pierre reluctantly entered the spotlight to the clamor of the audience. André gave him a microphone and invited him to join the orchestra in singing. The audience didn't care that Pierre wasn't a professional vocalist. For thousands of people to witness, it was a unique look into their intimate relationship. The video rapidly went viral on the internet, revealing a side of André that was seldom shown in interviews. The father, not the maestro. The pace was still brutal behind the scenes. Careful scheduling was necessary for André's recuperation, but the demands of traveling left little time for relaxation. It was quite hot in Brazil. Jet lag in Australia was terrible. The most physically taxing numbers were scheduled early in the show, when André's energy was at its peak, thanks to adjustments made by his staff to set lists. There was always a chance, even then. Everything may end again if his condition returned. In those years, Pierre's role expanded even further. He was doing more than just logistics. He developed into a silent protector who occasionally overrode his father's intuition. André acknowledged that he occasionally disagreed with Pierre about slowing down, but he also understood that the tour could go on because of his son's caution. Subtle alterations in André's performance style were noticed by fans. In between pieces, there were more opportunities for audience engagement and storytelling. It was more than just energy conservation. André was deliberately trying to make his performances more personal. His goal was for the audience to experience the adventure with him. All the triumphs, all the anxieties, all the highs. The true machine returned in full force by 2012. Once more, the travels covered continents. However, the shadow of his disease persisted. In interviews, André talked candidly about how it had transformed him. He no longer believed that he was unbeatable. Each performance felt like a gift rather than a promise. The return was astounding in terms of finances. Millions were made from the tours. Sales of DVDs increased. The Mrike concerts evolved into yearly international film festivals. However, the success was the result of a never-ending balancing act between safeguarding the guy at the center of it all and providing the spectacular spectacle that fans had come to demand. Pierre's impact on corporate choices became much more apparent. In order to give the orchestra more time to practice, he bargained with venues for extended setup periods. Regardless of the venue, he insisted on having medical personnel present at every performance. And he started getting ready for something André didn't talk about much. What would happen if he was unable to tour on this scale anymore? Those close to André noticed the signals, but he dismissed the concept of slowing down in interviews. The distances between the excursions increased a little, but they were still enormous. More time for recuperation was made possible by the calendar. It was preservation, not retreat. Nevertheless, the requests persisted. The calendar had more than 100 concerts in 2016. This resulted in frequent travel, shifting weather patterns, and the psychological stress of conducting an orchestra in several different nations. The glitter in the music was all that fans could see. When the lights went out, they failed to notice the fatigue. Then, during a tour to Europe, the incident occurred. It was severe, but not spectacular enough to make headlines. André took longer than normal breaks between numbers during a concert in Vienna. Pierre took a closer look at the stage. The music went on, but the atmosphere changed. André later said that during that set, he had felt lightheaded. The memory lingered with them both even after he concluded the performance. It served as a warning that danger always existed, regardless of how cautious they were. It reaffirmed Pierre's underlying goal to keep his father safe while keeping the audience in the dark. André reduced some of the show's physical elements the next year. He gave his orchestra members new responsibilities. He supported their individual performances, allowing himself brief breaks without interfering with the concert's rhythm. Fans adored it. They perceived it as generosity. It was also a tactic for André. However, the modifications did not imply retreat. The MRI concerts broke attendance records in 2019. Thousands of people were singing along as André stood on that stage, grinning and holding a bow. It was a moment that might have been the ideal way to cap off a career. He wasn't finished, though. The trip halted overnight in 2020 when the epidemic struck. It was the longest hiatus André had ever taken from performing as an adult. He used it to record, practice, and maintain constant communication with his players. However, it also turned into a period of introspection. He got a glimpse of what life might be like without touring all the time during the forced pause. He came back to the stage full of energy after the constraints were removed. The crowds were more impassioned, larger and louder. Live music had been missing. More than he acknowledged, André had missed them. The tours have persisted in recent years, although with modifications based on lessons gained from the past. The timetables are more intelligent. The journey is designed to reduce stress. Pierre attends nearly all of his performances, yet prepared, yet observing. André Rieu is 75 years old. He continues to play with the same fervor that made him famous throughout the world. However, people who are familiar with his past are aware of the significance of every note. Every performance is a triumph over the illness that once threatened to keep him silent. André hasn't revealed one item to the public, though, a choice that has the potential to alter everything. Someone close to the team recently overheard André and Pierre discussing the prospect of one last world tour, the largest they have ever attempted, in a private chat. Dates have not been disclosed. Although no information has been made public, if it occurs, it will put everything they've constructed to the test. The link between father and son, the music, and the endurance. For the first time since his return, the debate is whether André should do it rather than if he can.